Hey neighbors, the handyman here with Initiative Coffee Company, along with the Serpent of Rama himself, Jake Del Maro. Today we're talking about DDEX-02-05, Flames of Kythorn. Writer John Rossamagno, editors Claire Hoffman, Chris Tulach, and Travis Woodall. This is a 4-hour module set for Tier 1 play, specifically tuned for 5 second-level characters. Flames of Kythorn features an investigation that takes your players through the streets of Mulemaster, and substantially includes roleplay scenarios, causing time management to be a challenge. The Wave and Wink. The adventure starts at a noble's party in the Wave and Wink. Try to connect it to previous modules. Does Zora Culkin send her regards? The party doesn't really have a clear objective for going to this party unless you give them one. Are they there to make contact with nobles and Mulemaster? Are they groupies of Merim Tem? Have they heard about the paintings of Andric Goss and want to see one for themselves? There are several locations to investigate and a good deal of potential for social encounters on the way. Eventually, the party will make it to the balcony and take a look at the painting to move on to the next part of the adventure. Celebration interrupted. When the party views the painting, a box text cutscene starts a fire. The painting has some magic hold over the owner of the Wave and Wink. She throws liquor on an old oil lamp as well as Zora Goss. In the end, the inn and Goss erupt in flames. Despite everyone's best efforts, the tavern is going to burn down. Players may take it upon themselves to evacuate the injured or take charge and ensure everyone gets out safely. Kata Brizik will likely go down for arson and attempted murder, despite being under a spell unless the characters intervene. A successful charisma check gives him about 2 days to solve the matter before Brizik hangs. So when we look at 2-5, we're seeing a situation where we don't have a lot of reason to be where we're at when the adventure starts. I think the adventure hooks are pretty weak here. So you have to, as a DM, come up with some scenarios to get your players engaged.
Yeah, tagging along with that, the biggest thing for me is, of course, conversation coherency and story coherency. That is very important for these adventures. When you are starting out with a new table, 2-1, 2-2, and now to 2-5, you're probably having very similar players playing, and if they're new players, what really gets a player to get connected to not only just Adventures League but D&D in general is having the ability to have the cohesion. So what I've been typically doing is, if I've got the same table or same players at the table, or even if it's the same players, different characters, I'm very lenient with the ruling of what happened. You have a relevant character here. It's not like you're bringing a level 4 character. If you are, it doesn't really matter. Maybe the reason they're here is because Zora Culkin from 2-2 is here, or maybe they're there as their entourage, or they were sent as a placeholder. Maybe she's just dealing with her mansion being up in flames. That is another way you can be like, hey, can you just go there and act like my placeholder?
Right. Be
that
my
is
representation at this party.
Yeah, and that creates at least some sort of legitimacy to instead of there's a party going on.
Yeah.
Not every character wants a party. If you got an urchin, or you got somebody that's off doing their own thing, a party might not be the likely scenario. And I'm not saying that everyone plays their backgrounds to the max, but why would a wizard show up to this?
Sure.
Maybe whatever reason, make it convincing, and that could be it.
For sure. I think one of the other issues here is we have 5 to 7 named NPCs in this first session, in this first part of the module. I think that gets extended to about 10 or 11 named NPCs by the end of the module, which makes a lot for new DMs especially, but even me having DM for 13, 15, gosh, too many years, 22 years. Even I struggle with that many NPCs kind of going through my head at one time. So it's important to kind of keep those straight. I guess the benefit is they're not throwaway NPCs by and large. They show up in other modules.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if I were a DM, I would keep the Dramatis Personae pretty on hand. And I would probably add to it. I don't think it's exhaustive of all the NPCs in this module.
In that same vein, when the player enters this function at the Wave and Wink, you as a DM reading box text alone, what's going to happen is you're going to have so many places of interest. I think it is important that you let your players do the I'm splitting the party. I mean, you're within the same building,
Mm-hmm.
so it's not as big of a deal, but
Sure.
know your wave and wink. Know what's going on, and if need be, because this is actually a part that I do not like as a DM, when it's like roll a perception check as you're walking through the crowd and then you pick
Mm-hmm.
up full paragraphs of conversation. That to me is like the cheesiest thing ever, because I think I would hear like, ooh, have you heard? And then like by the time that statement's made, you're already 3 feet past that.
Right.
You're not
Yeah.
gonna stand up and go, what did I hear? Like, you're invading a conversation. So as a result, for me, what I typically would do is, let's say I'm using the Culkin hook. She's
Mhm.
there. Just have her at the top of the staircase. She's there before you guys, and like, she's doing her noble thing or whatever it may be, and have it so she's the info dump.
Mhm.
Like, maybe hear bits and pieces through the crowd, but like let her be the info dump, or even introduce Mistress Saj again from 2-1. She could
Mhm.
be there if you don't have Culkin.
Yeah, I think
Same
that's
way,
valuable.
I think it's a good usage of time, because then you don't need to be like random player perception checks. Or if
Mhm.
they are doing perception checks, maybe it's like for different info or like
Mhm.
snippets of fake info.
Yeah.
That would be bringing it to, and it's like, wait, I just heard down there, and it's like, yeah, well, they're not nobles,
Right.
so why would they
Right.
know?
That makes sense. I think one of the other issues is like I'm looking briefly through this mod and I see 10 locations for the Wave and Wink. That
Yeah,
seems like too many. That's a book chapter, right? Like
some of them won't come into play
half a
though.
castle, right? In one of the books.
I
I mean,
believe
and what
6,
I would say
7,
to
8,
that,
9 do not even come into play. So it's not
sure.
as, or 7, 8, and 9. That's like the back area. I mean, you
Yeah.
have like the coat room, but once again, that's awesome opportunities for your players to explore. They're gonna go to the bar. You're gonna
Hmm.
say, hey, these like the regulars, they're still tipping
Hmm.
and they're getting info. That could be a little info dump here and
Yeah.
there. And I still don't like the words info dump, but
Right.
like that's what inevitably is gonna happen. You don't know why you're here. Um, and it's not going to matter, because it's got to matter to some degree, but everything you learn here will play some point of the motive,
Hmm.
rationale, whatever it may be. Like, 2 pages later, not even, because the place
Yeah.
catches on fire as soon as the cutscene happens.
Yeah, I guess that's another issue I have with this is it feels very video gamey where you like have to interact with the right object to engage the next part of the story,
Eh.
which I mean is okay, I guess. It just feels a little bit forced.
But then I think if that is the capacity, they quickly remove that afterwards, and it becomes a sequence again. But the other part is, after you have done the thing at the Wave and Wink, it opens back up into like a 3 or 4 places you can go and travel to. So I think that having a forced interaction after having so much freedom isn't
Sure.
such a bad thing. It kind of refocuses everyone. It's like, why are we here
That's
again?
fair. That makes sense. Yeah. Anything else about the Wave and Wink?
All I would say is know your stuff about this.
Yeah.
Make these people come to life. Maybe have the owners of the bar. You got Erden and Kata. Maybe have them for some period of time. I know Kata's the instigator,
Mhm.
but like maybe have her helping out a little bit more. Like, make them maybe interactable before you go and have a forced cutscene.
Yeah, and I think it's probably valuable to do that if for no other reason to establish Kata as not like a cutthroat person
Yeah.
before she lights her bar on fire, like um to some degree like playing into her character as like a fairly decent um individual really highlights the fact that like, oh, this is not in her normal
Normals,
behavior.
yeah.
This is not a normal action she's done. There's something charming or hypnotic or somehow influential going on here that is beyond like the normal scope of regular interaction. So
I would, moving past that, just the Wave and Wink description, but actually the next part of Celebration Interrupted.
mhm.
This kind of part is a very interesting, peculiar, like force of events,
Mhm.
because players are going to want to do certain things. They're going to want to be like, I'm going to tackle Kata or something along those
Mhm.
lines of subduing her. She's going to stand still. Someone's gonna need to put out Tiaga Goss.
Mhm.
Someone needs to put her out. The painting's gone. Place is gonna catch on fire rapidly. There are so many small things happening, but it's important to make sure that the understanding of rush and getting out can kill people.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the other thing there is like your players might not, right? Like I've never run this at a table where like my players weren't interested in like putting the person out
Yeah.
and saving them. But I guess it's viable that like your players might just be interested in like, oh my God, there's a fire, let's go.
Yeah.
Screw these people. We're not worried about them and just escape. So I guess part of it is like be cautious of that and be wary that that is a potentiality. But my expectation is your players are going to want to like, you play
Help.
Dungeons and Dragons to save the day, right? You don't play Dungeons and Dragons to barely survive a structure fire and narrowly escape your death. So,
Different tables, I guess.
yeah. Going into the fire itself, there's a couple of things you can do. There's like the physical checks of like carrying the nobles out. There's a charisma check involved to make sure that people leave in like an orderly fashion and don't trample each other. If folks hang out too long, there's some constitution saves to avoid exhaustion from smoke inhalation. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. It's a little bit of an exploration kind of skill check focus at the end of a social encounter, which is a nice way to like turn the page and move on to the next section, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. Burning Deceit. Part 2 is a scavenger hunt to find information in the location of responsible parties. It starts in the home of Andric Goss or his Thayan benefactor. Andric's home features exploratory skill checks and clues leading to an art gallery. The Thayan home has notes suggesting Andric's work incites violence, but getting the information likely leads to a fight. The player's next stop is the Ironheart Gallery, a new art gallery featuring Goss's work. After a social encounter with the gallery owner, the players can determine that the majority of the artwork is being bought by Doral's sire, who you find out is a glassblower, as gifts for other nobles. If the players try to avoid the gallery owner by coming in at night, they're faced with several animated objects. Whether a social or combat encounter, evidence in the gallery leads to a market in the Zent ghetto. The market features a large mural that seems to be stirring up merchants. Here, the players find out where Doral's sire is and when to confront him about the paintings. I don't like this section. I kind of hate it.
Give me some explanation why here. I mean, that's a bold statement.
Yeah, it's frustrating because it's like this information scavenger hunt that it's a little bit connect the dotsy, but not in a way that's engaging or gives me as a player the feeling of success. It just feels like I have to go through these motions to get to where I want to get, right?
So where do you see possible improvements happening?
I mean, I guess partially you could, if the players visit the Thayan home, maybe just skip right to the next section. Like maybe the Thayan is in contact with Doral's sire and knows where he's at and has notes. Maybe there's notes in Andric's home. I mean, I don't want to cut out a major portion of this module. I don't want to cut out the whole part 2, but I think having to visit all 4 of these locations gets tedious, gets frustrating
Well, you don't need
for players.
You only really need to visit 2/3.
Right.
I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I needed to go all 4, but it's typically Andric's home, the gallery, and then the Zent ghettos.
The Zent ghettos.
And I've had variations of going to the Ironheart Gallery where where you can just ask around. People know who a Zok Throm, the Thayan guy, is. They'll give up information. But that's also where you'll find the fact that the Hawks are involved, where they'll attack you as well because they're like, you're in cahoots, and it's like, I'm not in cahoots, I guess. But if you want to fight about it, we'll fight.
Yeah, I guess I just had like a sour taste in my mouth about this setup for a section.
Sure.
I remember In season 1, there's the adventure where you have to like find the books, and you have to like stop at 5 different places just to like move on to the next part of the adventure.
Sure.
And it just feels like, I don't know, it just feels like going through motions for the sake of like filling out pages
I think
of
there's a lot of
text.
useful info at the spy's house,
Mm-hmm.
or the Thayan spy's house. It's just if you can find it. I think that to me is kind of annoying because they mention of Razendal.
Mm-hmm.
Razendal is the Sephiroth's brother, who is the High Blade, and that's a lead off to a different quest, or a different adventure, 2-14 or so,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like that's something, and it's like it's his twin brother or something along the lines, and like that's information you wouldn't necessarily have. Like I
Yeah.
looked it up last time I ran it, I was like I totally forgot this was here,
Yeah.
and but the thing is I think that the typical motion's gonna go. I don't see why it's necessary to include the spy
Mm-hmm.
in at least the exploration, because all the things lead towards the path of his Andrek's home,
Yeah.
to the Ironheart Gallery, because he gets a direct invitation. You get a piece of paper. Excuse me. You get a direct invitation, and you get a piece of paper from that, and that's to me the natural course of action, because it's like, oh, this is something, and I have a name.
Yeah, I guess like one of my concerns is like I don't know what value comes out of the Zent Ghetto market aside from like further establishing the already established notion that these paintings have some kind of hypnotic effect.
Yeah,
There's just not a lot of value. It just seems like
it's
a
to
stop
exasperate the
off.
point.
Yeah, and maybe like when factions were more relevant, it would have been more useful. But now that factions are largely abandoned, I don't know like what the value of like visiting the Zentarim like
I think
home base location.
I guess honestly, well, Zengoto coming from Zental Keep mostly, but even still, it's like I'm looking at it and just look at bullet points. It just looks like they're trying to further incriminate someone when it's not necessary, I guess. But
Yeah.
like the painting itself is kind of like, I think that movement to feel like it inspires. But like even as I'm just briefly reading it, it's like it feels like it's an incrimination.
Yeah.
It's like this guy has spoken to another Thayan man, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay.
Sure.
It's not necessary, but it definitely adds to the, like, Andrek's the problem.
Yeah. And
The Storo Sire guy, he is also a problem.
Right. I mean, I guess like if you're short on time, like my recommendation would be to drop the market and the Thayan home. Or like if your players want to go to the Thayan home, maybe just like give them all the clues they need when they're there with exploration instead of like these awkward social encounters that are kind of underdeveloped all the way to the market and then the glassblowers shop.
I would recommend, if you do want to do the mural, maybe removing how many people there are there.
Yeah.
Maybe have like 2 people, or maybe it's like the closing up time, which kind of coincides pretty well with timing if you go from there straight to the glassblower shop, because it's like, oh, the things are closing down, and that leads into the final sequence. I don't really encourage. I mean, this is truly a situation where you only have one fight, or I guess like two-part one. It's like 1 2-part fight, but like you don't want to weaken your guys' resources beforehand. So I'd almost avoid the spies, or like make it so they're very easily swayed to a degree. It's like,
Yeah.
we are trying to figure out the wave and wink, and I think if you mention that, like that diffuses the situation. But like making it, at least the mural portion, being like, there's one guy that's in like the far away from the painting, and one guy that's like really close to the painting, and then being like, one guy's less interested, he's interested but less interested, and the other guy's like, oh, and like looking up at the painting in awe. Like I think that would remove a lot of like the potential social aspects of it.
Yeah,
and just
and
be
I guess
more
like
of an
part of that
information
is
thing.
coming up with a reasonable explanation as to why this painting affects some people more than others. And that's something that I don't think it really goes into in the module, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't spot it. But like that's a
like
DM
distance,
choice.
and it's like distance and how much they're like actually looking at it. That's like
Right.
what I figured out, because it's like people that are like, back to Kata. She's super interested because she was there during the entire installation of
Right.
for her nephew's painting. or not nephews, Tiago Goss's nephew's painting. Like, she was there during the whole installation and watched the whole thing, and that's why she kind of got attracted to it. But the thing to note, I do want to bring up is that if somebody casts something along the lines like protection from good and evil, or something along those lines, there's no direct like saying, oh, it's a charm spell. It's kind of an effect, and I actually kind of struggle with that every time I run it, because I feel like my players do bring that up. And
you don't want to feel like you're forcing your players to waste their resources.
Exactly.
Right? Like, ultimately, like, they're at level 2, they have 2 first level spells a day.
Yeah.
And they're using one of them to try to, like, break this hold.
Yeah.
And I feel like it sends the wrong message if you're like, oh, it doesn't do anything. Well, she's not hypnotized, right? Or she's not possessed, or she's not charmed then.
It's just like it's like an emotional impact more than anything else.
Yeah, and I feel like at this level of play, especially when you're dealing with new players, you don't want this mod. I feel like mods are often written to, like, be the exception to the rule, right? This whole, like, specific is more relevant than generic. And so a lot of mods are written to, like, oh no, it works differently here than normal because it's a special circumstance. And to some degree, like, I get
it shouldn't be the norm.
Well, I get the desire to want that in the module that you write, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, when you're dealing with tier 1 players, maybe this is the second mod, maybe it's the first mod they've ever played. And ultimately, like, your goal here is to establish how the game works generally, not specifically in this one circumstance.
Agreed. And if somebody does decide to do some sort of protection, I would almost make it like a stun effect on that person. If you're directly looking at mechanics, it's
clearly
just, it's kind of tough.
An effect, but not the effect you were intended.
Correct.
Something. Give them something to let them know that they're on to something. Otherwise, you're going to lead them down another direction, and then, like, your players are going to be very frustrated because they were like, I thought I tried that, but it wasn't that. And you're like, oh, well, actually, and that's when it just kind of breaks down. And
when the words "well, actually" come out, you have fallen on your face. I don't say as a DM, but, like, you kind of have. And I'm not saying that we all get away from it, but it happens. And it's worse when it happens in tier 3 and tier 4 play, because it's like, well, this time. And it's like, I'm a person fighting a god. Like, why is it different this time? But, like, doing it and setting that example at tier 1 is really just a bad feeling.
And by tier 3 and tier 4, like, I am familiar enough with the rules to see like an exception when an exception comes up.
Yeah.
But here, when you're dealing with, like, very, very green players, like, it just doesn't seem...
Be accommodating.
It doesn't seem sporting, I guess.
Yeah.
To, like, take advantage of someone's lack of knowledge of a game and then, like, exploit that to make them even more confused. It doesn't seem like a good way to get them to come back.
Just reward them for being creative, I think, is the biggest thing. Like, if they're like, oh, I have this spell, let me look it up. And I'm like, cool, you're opening up a book that, you wouldn't necessarily have opened up. Awesome, that's one less book opening.
And tier 1, in my opinion, tier 1, like, I do a thing is better than I don't do a thing.
Exactly.
Right? So, like, if they're trying a thing, give them something for trying the thing, even if it's not the thing that you think makes sense. Just find a way to accommodate tier 1 players.
Yeah, and then throw an inspiration on top of it.
Yeah, for sure. Blazing conflict. The party should have enough clues to try to find the glassblower named Doral Sire. He's secretly a cultist of elemental flame and has been collecting combustible materials. He plans on lighting Mole Master ablaze and has help from other cultists and fire snake eggs that he plans to hatch. In his death throw, he heralds Andric's success, leading to another combat with Andric and several magmen. So this is where the rubber really hits the road with combat here, right?
Yeah.
There's up to 5 cultists on a standard party. It gets worse from there. Fire snakes.
Magic. This is just that fight that just, like, it's not appropriate for level 2 characters. I'm going to just throw it out there. This is not appropriate for 5 level 2 characters. Considering the fact that, okay, you can remove fire snakes, but fire snakes still have an effective hit point pool of, like, 45.
Yeah.
Because they have resistance to non-magical attacks.
And
largely,
that's just
like, goofy.
None of your players are going to have magic weapons.
No one will. Like back when even we were dropping magic items all the time, no
Yeah.
one has like season 1. There was no +1 items until Road Iron Keep,
Mhm.
1-8, I believe.
Yeah, even if you
And
play the hard books, like the Tyranny of Dragons has one magic item in it in the first half of the adventure. So, and it's a bow. Like there's just
I think it's the
not,
same for Iron Route too. I think it's a +1
a
bow.
+1 longbow or something. Like there's just not a
Just in
lot
case
of
you need a second one.
yeah. There's just not a lot on the table for your players to come in and successfully like manage fire snakes. I guess if they're all casters, or you have
That's a
like
bigger
heavy
problem.
wizard,
Cultists rush them.
right? I mean, if you have a heavy wizard party, that's one thing, or a cleric party, but if you've got fighters and rangers, like you're gonna struggle. They're gonna struggle with this fight.
The issue also still stems from the fact of what's your max hit point as a barbarian? Let's say what, 20, maybe.
Yeah, I mean 12 plus con, and then another
Level
7. I don't know, 20, 24,
20-ish. Yeah. So
22,
you're
24.
also looking at the fact that these snakes, which harping still on the snakes, do 6 damage on each attack, and they have multi-attack.
Yeah.
So like, and 3 of which are fire. And it's
Right,
like,
so even your barbarians aren't going to resist this.
you hit them, and they do fire damage back to you.
Yeah.
It's just like it's not a situation you want to be in.
And going back to new players, they're not going to be in the mindset of casters focus on the fire monsters, melee focuses on cultists, right? Like, it's easy for me after playing for this long to be like, oh, well, the solution to that is have your melee players focus on the cultists and everybody else focuses on the fire snakes. The problem with that is, like, I run the Bard's Tale where they've been playing together for 3 years and still haven't established that as, like, a reasonable, like, course of action.
In the red, we're trying. We're getting
like,
so close. We just have one murderer, and that's
right.
it.
But that's kind of where we're at, like, and it's you can't count on new players to know these things, and like, I don't expect experienced players to want to spend the time in tier 1 anyway.
No.
So,
well, this is not the season for you then.
Right. I mean, you're going to spend 14 adventures in tier 1 here if that's what you want to do.
The other thing I really do like, and I think is important, maybe as a DM change, Dorosire has his own stat block. Mm-hmm. He's got a built-in flame tongue, but does 1d6 extra fire damage as a bonus action. Really love it. Mm-hmm. But if he max hits you, he's doing 14 damage to you.
Without a crit.
Yeah. That's 6 on fire, and his 1d6 plus 2 on top.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying that happens, and, it does happen, it happens. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, what I do like to try to do, at least this is a DM preference, is averaging numbers. So it's a little bit more expected. Like, oh, I'm going to hit you, average numbers. But it's to give him a little more hit points. Mm-hmm. I know he's not the final fight.
Right.
Maybe remove a cultist or 2. Give him more beef. He's a fire elemental cultist. He's a eternal flame. He's the guy. We just had a situation in 2-2 where you fight an Azir, and honestly, it's kind of underwhelming. That fight is a little underwhelming if like, let's say you skip that first or that second fight, mm-hmm. or the fight with the Mephits. But this is a cool guy. He was imbued with the power of the elemental Lord of Fire to be able to do flame tongue damage. He has 11 hit points otherwise. That is one swing from
one round.
That's one round from a barbarian with a 13 AC.
Yeah. Like,
he's not hard to hit. And I'm not saying that's the issue with tier 1, but he's a CR 1/4. Like, just give him a little bit more. He's a guy that's like supposed to be, since he's not the final boss, it's tough. But knowing that the final boss has 4 hit points because he's a commoner.
Yeah, I mean, the final boss isn't particularly, I mean, like, the encounter is interesting, but like, Andric is a commoner stat block, so he's not particularly
he takes one hit, he's down.
Either,
It's a lot of one hit, one turn things. So like, maybe make it like, I'd almost say it like right when he's before Doral's about to die, to pull some people off of Doral, or make the Magmans get closer, the fire Magmans get closer. Mm-hmm. Like, maybe he's like, oh, I can hear him now. He's coming, dead. And then, then it's another situation of that happening. So I do believe that it is important to have that. I just don't know exactly what changes would be completely necessary.
Yeah, it's tough. And you're going to have to kind of play that by ear.
Yeah.
I'm not a big proponent of just like adding hit points and making something have a higher AC because it doesn't really.
I'm against higher ACs.
I mean, all it does is make combat longer. You know what
It
I mean?
does.
Like, and
But
like
at
this,
11 hit points, a barbarian. That's actually what happened on our Monday. Was someone came up, he attacked, hit, action surged, hit, dead.
Right. Yeah, and I guess like this was a time when Wizards of the Coast was really pushing like combat should last no more than 4 rounds.
Sure.
And I kind of like get that. 30 rounds of combat is exhausting.
It's so tiring.
But I think there's something to be said about beefing this encounter up a little bit.
It still comes down to what levels do you have? Because I believe our party might have been 3 and 4, not 2s.
Yeah.
So like there's a bit of a difference. You have an ability score upgrade up to 18, or you have a sentinel, you have something to make you a lot more durable. I mean, you have now 30 something hit points as a fighter. Mm-hmm. The guy needs to be beefed up. That's a one hit encounter. Like,
yeah, and it's tough because like it's frustrating because like I think the fire snakes are too beefy. Just because it ends
that's
up
why I pull cultists.
Yeah, I mean like the fire snakes are rough. Like that's what this encounter ends up being, right? Like inevitably at some point all the people will be dead and your party will be dealing with magic resistant fire snakes.
Yeah.
Until the end of this part of this pair of combats.
Yeah.
And like fire snakes are interesting because they have a couple of interesting abilities, but those are like automatic abilities that don't get more interesting 3 rounds later. Right? Like
one thing I would suggest instead of the auto damage to people is like conveniently forget. Because then it makes the counter a little bit easier.
Or give it a save.
Yeah, give it a save. Make it a dex save, DC 10 save for all. Like, you know that, and I know it's 3 damage, but taking 3 damage is an annoying thing when you have multiple attacks. It's like it attacks, then it's like almost a guaranteed 9 damage, and that's a lot of damage.
Yeah.
But you know, it is what it is, and you'll have to feel it out. It's definitely dependent on your character's level. It's gonna be a tough one for level 2s.
Yeah.
But if there's a level 3s and 4s, it's gonna be a cakewalk.
Yeah.
It's going to be a cakewalk.
Yeah, speaking of cakewalks, after the fire snakes, there's a couple of magmen and commoner stat block. I think when we played this, Andric reminds me of it took 2 rounds, yeah, but Andric reminds me of there's an episode of Ninja Turtles where Donatello has a pencil with a magic stone, or meets an artist with a pencil with a magic stone, where all his drawings come to life. Mm-hmm. That is essentially what we're looking at in this second encounter here. Is Andric is drawing these magmen into existence. 4 hit points don't last very long, especially when you have a ranger that crits. You know, it's underwhelming. I think the magmen are cool, but they don't last long enough to really be cool.
I think that's where I stand. Like, I don't necessarily need to have Andric become a tank. But like having your party's gonna be worn out. If it's a higher level party, this is going to be a drawn out encounter. Mm-hmm. The effects of I think it's the right choice of enemies.
Yeah.
Considering we had 2-1, which were like elements, or you had like demons showing up, and you're like, why are demons showing up?
Right.
Like this actually to me makes sense. These fights make sense.
It fits within the narrative, the overall narrative of the season.
I just wish there was a little bit more beefy guys instead of like AC 13 or 14 and 9 hit points. And it's like explosion.
Yeah, when you get to very strong, there's 4 more magmen and they all have 22 hit points. But like a 4 hit point leader, like it's tough because he's gonna be a focus. Well, they want to represent Andric as this character that is like this character with a broken mind, right? Who is just a regular person who succumbed to madness and is now creating these things, and making him a commoner with 4 hit points gives him a level of there's a level of sympathy there for the character where you're like, oh, I wish I didn't have to kill him, or I wish I didn't kill him. He only had 4 hit points.
It's even as extreme as like the when you are a so and so and you attack him and you're like, I do 8 damage. I'm like, he's dead. Like he's
Yeah.
not like he can come back to life
Right.
dead. He's just
Yeah.
straight
He's
dead.
just dead. Yeah.
He's just dead. And
Um,
that's like I'm okay with. It's just and it's like he didn't do cultist training. He didn't go to
yeah.
Cult's Academy.
He was
But
just
like
crazy. Like
he was just
mad.
crazy.
He was just mad and was doing the will of Imix, presumably.
But the thing I think if it's like they make statements saying like in the mod afterwards, like if he's alive, and it's like I don't think I've ever been in a mod where he's lived because it's like 4 hit points. It's like if you hit, he's dead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could subduel him.
But like
I've
if you're a
run this
ranger,
a few times and that's never come up.
no,
like,
it's never. Like unless the arrows are shooting like boxing gloves, which
yeah,
they can't.
those like uncommon magic items, or
yeah,
those common
not gonna
magic
happen.
items, right? But like subduel is specifically only for melee weapon attacks, right?
Yeah.
Like even and it's just frustrating because like it feels like a trap from the writers. Like this person is like spawning Magman every round. You have to bring him down, and then you bring him down only to find out that like, oh, he has 4 hit points. He's a regular person who's just ill. Like,
yeah, I don't know what you would change about it. It's like you said, it's like a sympathy thing. He was crazy, but it's like people are gonna immediately target him, and it's almost to the degree of like feeling out your table and seeing the reactions when the first guy shoots at him and he's dead, and they go, "Oh, wasn't expecting that one," and then switching their target, and it's like the players didn't expect it either. Which I guess it's like a big "I gotcha."
Yeah.
But like, I don't know if that's where I want to have an "I gotcha."
Yeah. And then the Magmen they're cool monsters. I think it starts with 4 as a baseline.
Yeah.
And then,
I'm gonna go like this. I think the encounter's fine. Like with the Magman, I think I think the adjustments with Magman make sense.
Mm-hmm.
They're there to kind of expose you to like the Method Magman idea of like they explode and things happen and you take damage.
It's a new mechanic to kind of get used to, which I think is interesting. Aside from that, I don't know. It's at least narratively relevant. It fits with the overall story. I like that. It's better than like demons for whatever reason.
I mean, don't you like demons when they're showing up in elemental situations? It's
I didn't like demons when they were showing up in Dragonet situations. I didn't like Blue Slotty either, but there we were. Other than that, I think it's a pretty straightforward fight. If by chance Andric is incapacitated and not killed, somehow that forces him to lose his magical abilities. I'm not sure. That doesn't really go into detail as to why that happens. Just that you won the fight, so his threat is minimized, I guess.
And basically, they lost the will to do it. Someone that I think would be really neat. Oh, we were talking about inspirations. It's inspiration. So Andre Goss's inspiration came from the Flame, assumingly. They mention it in his note. It's like, when they received the painting. But like this character, if he's alive, I think would be such a neat follow-up character. If we are already talking about the 10 other, characters that were introduced, this guy would be a cool like mole almost, or like something later in seasons, like because he gets released into his uncle's care if he's alive. This character would be like really cool as someone that we could see as a almost a consistent antagonist, like almost however joking it'd be. Like, well, he didn't find his place in the fire cult. Now I gotta find it for the water crushing wave.
that is an interesting idea.
Like a really funny like thing. Like, oh, he switched his thing for the season. Now he's into the earth or something like ridiculous. And like now we just have this like Ironheart Gallery just continuously pumping his work. That's just like completely different elements. I know it's a long shot, and I might try to incorporate that and see how goofy it is and be like, you remember that guy that started the painting when the fire?
Yeah.
This guy.
I mean, it also provides the opportunity to gain insight into the cult, right?
Yeah.
Like he was not a card-carrying member, but he was being presumably directed by Imix, and it could give some sort of like inspiration, or it gives the players a resource to use to try, like if they're in a fire-based mission later on in the season and stuck, potentially they could go to Andric and like interrogate him and try to find out a clue based off his knowledge of like the will of Imix or something. Last season I talked about using NPCs and favors as a non-monetary reward structure.
Yep.
And so like I think this provides you an asset that you can use if he survives, that the players can go to and try to.
He owes you.
Yeah,
he owes
be more successful.
He owes you not to, because he's not dead. You
Right.
didn't clap him like right then and there.
Right.
Like he owes you to some degree.
Yeah.
And I think he'd be a good, like, either it's like cult recruitment. What are they doing? Maybe you could use him as a resource for like understanding how the cults are doing things, or like what magic they might be doing, or make up some story. But like, it's up to the DM. The DM doesn't have to use these ideas. But
Right.
like, to me, making him just, I think I probably will in like further tier 1 gameplay, is making Andric Goss just show up and be Andric Goss and like crazy and
Right.
being like, I can paint metal, like I can paint glass and it comes to life, and then like that's
and people
his
just
whole
like,
persona.
oh my god, get that paintbrush away from him. Yeah.
Please. Wait, is it blue, not red this time? Okay. What's going on? I don't know. I think he's a cool character with however you play him.
Yeah, I think so too. Like I said, I think there's some sympathy to that character that like takes him out of the realm of like average kind of generic villain and puts him into like a real asset that could be kind of leaned on throughout the season.
For whatever it's worth. I mean, he's not going to add much, but like a familiar face draws more attention to players paying attention than anything else.
Yeah, and I think like one of the key things about Adventures League for me when I'm running is finding tools to pass on information in ways that don't feel like I don't think the players can get there on their own, right? Sure. So like having an NPC they can go back to gives me a tool to provide them information that maybe they didn't get to in like the way the mod suggests they should get it.
Yeah.
Which is a nice resource to have kind of in my back pocket for new tables or experienced tables that just like miss the boat. One of the downfalls of the earlier seasons is there's not a lot of contingencies if players miss steps.
Yeah.
They don't have like secondary chances built in beyond just like someone else make that check now, you know, and that always feels
or it's like caught up in a way. It's like it feels like you messed up, and it's like it gives you the whole list of like things you missed at the end of a screen, and like then they're like, here you go. And that's what happens, I think, if you don't get all the information from listening to people going through the crowds at the beginning. It's like now you'll hear it at the end because people are now talking more because the place is on fire. Like, that's not, to me, a very good way of dropping info on people. Definitely useful info.
It doesn't feel like you've been successful. I think last time we talked about like feeling like you've failed, and having to feel like you've failed to move on. It feels like when you miss those things, it's like, oh, I failed, but that failure doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
So do my successes mean anything either? You know, so having these tools in your back pocket, NPCs that your players can go to if they're in trouble. In season
DM,
one,
it's just awesome to do.
Yeah, and in season one, I framed it as like a resource. Like you have a finite amount of favors that you have acquired based off your actions that you can cash in. Yeah. And so like you have those available to you. Hold on to them as long as you need to, but when you need to use them, feel free to do so.
I agree.
So, I mean, I think there's a lot of value to holding on to Andric throughout the season.
Sure thing.
Overall, I think there are a lot of strengths and weaknesses, and some of those in this module are the same, right? I think there's a big lean into social encounters, which is kind of a double-edged sword. One, it really can engage your players if they're looking for a social type game. Two, it can be a big kind of turnoff for players who aren't, right? And unfortunately, as a DM, it's tough to predict who you have at your table, especially if you're playing in the drop-in, drop-out scenario. It can
Yep.
be tricky to rely on. It's tough to like time out the adventure to know how much time you're going to need. I would say the last kind of pair of encounters probably take 35 minutes.
Depends how people are rolling.
If your players know what they're doing, it can take up to 35 minutes. As few as 10 if you've got a lot of veteran players, you know.
Sure.
So it's tough to like gauge how much time you're going to need and how long things in social encounters are going to take. Overall, I think the story's interesting. I just think it takes too long to get there. I think that second section we talked about a little bit. I think it's dragged out a little bit too far. There's a little bit too much connect the dots scavenger hunt kind of gameplay for my tastes. Maybe you can find ways to make all of those spots more interesting to kind of make them more relevant. But ultimately, I just don't feel like all 4 spots have equal value or really have much value at all, depending on which ones. I don't think the marketplace, aside from like, it's frustrating because there's one bit of information that you need to get to the next location where you get one piece of information to move forward. And it doesn't feel like there's a real way to succeed in that beyond just like going down this like narrow path. That aside, it does a lot to establish the Cult of Eternal Flame as a meaningful threat. It really kind of lays the foundation, or continues the foundation that was laid in earlier modules, exploring the Cult of Fire. Tier 1 predominantly is going to focus on fire and water? Fire and air.
It's a little bit. I think it's an adventure every for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I do not remember. I think there's multiples, but it's mostly fire, and I think they drop off in tier 2.
Sure.
And I know at least there's air in tier 2 play, but it's definitely fire in tier 1.
Mm-hmm. So there it is, DDEX-02-05, Flames of Kythorn. Thank you so much for listening to some advice to streamline and run it for your tables. Be a good neighbor, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Patreon, and from now until the next time, roll together.